Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And I'm Andrea Crane.
We are going to be talking again about another peptide today, which I know nothing about this one, so I'm excited for Andrew to dive in. But as always, we're going to start our weekly podcast with our weekly Bible verse, and mine is coming from 1 Peter 1:21, and it says, "Through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, and so your faith and hope are in God."
All right, and mine is 2 Corinthians 5:20. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God.
Ugh, good ones.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, Andrea, so a few weeks ago we talked about BPC-157.
That's exactly right.
All right,
Good
and
memory.
that was a really interesting peptide. So that one was about kind of restoring some or reducing inflammation.
Yep.
What were some of the
Yeah,
other key things?
it was for a lot of what it does is reducing bad inflammatory compounds or deleterious inflammatory compounds and upregulating those inflammatory compounds that bring healing.
Okay. Yes. So today we're talking about TB500. So I'm assuming that does not stand for tuberculosis.
No, it doesn't. And you know what? I am not oh, well, I know what this stands for, but there are a couple of different monikers that are running around, but technically it stands for thymosin beta because this is TB500 and it's a fragment of a naturally occurring peptide. So we talked about these peptides, they last for sometimes milliseconds in the body. And so what they do in a lab is they tinker a little bit with the amino acid with the order in which they are on the chain, right? And so what that does is they can confer some added stability, but even so these injectable peptides, a lot of times they only last for minutes in the body. So we go from milliseconds or sometimes even nanoseconds with a physiological one to minutes in the body. However, they're going around flipping switches, right? Like they're turning things on and they're turning things off, and then it's the downstream impact that we enjoy later on.
Okay. So all are I can remind me again. All peptides are naturally occurring in the body, or are there synthetic versions?
So, a great question. Yes, they are derived from naturally occurring compounds, and sometimes it is an exact analog of the naturally occurring compound. However, they are synthesized in a lab and so therefore considered synthetic.
Okay.
But there are also times when they will tinker a little bit with the arrangement of the amino acids and to get a desired characteristic like added stability in the body.
Okay. So you have a note here that it works in conjunction with the BPC 157.
Yes. So TB500, so they take the naturally occurring thymosin beta-4. This is the naturally occurring peptide, and you can get thymosin beta-4 also. This is another peptide that is available. Now, this is a 43 amino acid fragment of TB4. Okay, and it's called thymosin beta 500 or TB500. And it is used, in fact, you almost always see it used in conjunction with BPC 157. They work very, very well together. They are in formulation together. I don't really see this used outside of BPC-157.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
So they're related in some way.
They are related in their activity. Yes,
Okay.
they kind of work hand in hand with tissue regeneration, wound healing, cellular repair, those kinds of mechanisms. They definitely are their activities dovetail.
Okay. So you
Mhm.
kind of mentioned what is it used for, like tissue repair and healing. So
Mhm.
like are we talking about like maybe a surgery recovery or
Yes,
like a
absolutely.
little fence scratch?
Yeah.
Something that maybe requires stitches or maybe that maybe
Well,
even internal
mhm.
repair?
Yes. So one of the places where we see this used is with immuno dysregulation. I see this and I have used it in folks for gut repair.
Mm.
And so if you know me, if you have spent any time talking autoimmunity with me at all, or listened to our previous podcast, you know that autoimmunity, in order to manifest, is dependent upon some level of intestinal permeability. And so there is um, some data, case studies, etc., that show that TB500 along with BPC-157 are able to exhibit some level of gut repair,
Huh.
and with the anti-inflammatory, so it downregulates interleukin 6. It downregulates oh, what's the other one I'm thinking of? There's another inflammatory piece of the cascade that it downregulates, and the name is escaping me right now. But yeah, with the downregulation of that type of inflammation, it can be very beneficial with regard to autoimmunity.
Like
But okay, but we're going to get to some cautions later on in this episode, so please listen to the end, because we're going to talk about this. Sometimes it's a fine line.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's used for tissue healing and recovery, so thinking like,
Mm-hmm.
so we're thinking like ligaments too, tendons,
Yes,
muscles.
yes, yes. And so those nagging knee injuries, shoulder injuries, these things tend to work both in a chronic and an acute situation. So for people that have had, like, horrendous ongoing knee, and that's me,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Both knees, terrible ongoing. Now, I don't know if it was an autoimmune process or if it was an osteoarthritic process, because I've been very hard on my knees over the years.
Mhm.
Um, but it could also be an autoimmune process, like a rheumatological disease. And um, whatever it is, BPC 500 or a BPC 157 and TB 500 have definitely helped me to regain my function. And so, yeah, and I've seen it used in ligament, tendon, and musculoskeletal injury.
And
Yeah.
are you so sorry, go
Mhm.
ahead.
Well, and so I also want to say, like, wound care, scar reduction, yes, certainly. Although if you've got a little scrape on your shin, it's a pretty expensive scar scar reduction strategy, unless, I don't know, you're dependent upon people taking pictures of your beautiful legs for a living.
Yeah, true. So
Yeah.
are you using them together? So
Mhm.
with BPC 157, you were
Yep.
talking about like, is it called titrating where you're use it for 6 weeks and then you're off for 6 weeks?
Yep.
So are
Yep,
you
you
using
pulse
them
these.
both?
Mhm.
So, oh, yeah, okay, pulse them. Um,
Yep.
do you inject them at the same time
I
for the
do.
same period of time and then
Yep.
take it off for the same period of time?
I do. So there are formulations that have them together. I don't use those because I use a little different dosing strategy for each one. But like I'll use the TB500 either every other day or 3 days a week, and I'll use the BPC 157 a lot more frequently than that. But I will inject them together for sure. I don't put them in the same syringe, but I will inject them in the same approximate location around, as close to the area of injury as I can get.
Okay. And
Mhm.
then, so we're talking tissue, but how about joints and cartilage?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, like these arthritic joints that are becoming more and more of a problem for people. Um, Degenerative joint disease, cartilage, they seem to help with those as well. Now, I would also caution people, this is not the panacea. So if you are not eating enough protein, if you have no collagen in your diet, then it's hard to induce repair when you don't have the raw materials. So
Mm.
that's like bringing the workers to build a house, but not having any of the materials there for them to use.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
a really good analogy.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It must be the water talking. Yeah.
um, so how about like other areas of body, like cardiovascular or neurological? Because
Yeah.
BPC-157 also had some of those benefits.
Yes, it does. And so, yeah, in fact, there is some evidence because these are studied compounds. Okay, so this is part of why it's a little bit avant-garde because these have been studied by drug companies, and they really would like to keep a hold of the yes they control the
Proprietary information.
that's right, to control the end to end on these things. But that's why I love peptides. I always call it the democratization of healthcare and healing. So I like that they're available to everybody now. That can make them a little dangerous if you use them, without any
Supervision.
regard. Yeah, I just and I hate the word supervision. It sounds like, oh, don't do anything without talking to me, but it's like, yeah, let your providers know. And I'm sorry, but if your medical provider has absolutely zero curiosity about any of these things, you might want to find a new provider,
Yes.
because it's a whole new world out there. And you've got to constantly be learning.
Hmm.
There's no
Yeah.
excuse for not learning constantly.
Yeah.
um so
So,
yeah, cardiovascular, neurological, and when you think the heart is a muscle, right? And
yeah.
so the remodeling that occurs like post myocardial infarct or post cardiac event, this potentially can help with that remodeling.
Okay. So you
Mhm.
mentioned autoimmune and chronic inflammation,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
obviously something that's becoming more and more
Yeah.
prevalent with a lot of people. I know so many clients that deal with it. So,
Mhm.
how does it work for that?
Well, so there's this theory of autoimmune disease that some of them come from something called the Th1 side of the immune system, and this is kind of getting into the weeds, but there's basically a couple of different branches in the immune system, and dysregulation of either of those branches can lead to different forms of autoimmunity. And so therefore, with certain autoimmune, okay, let's take pregnancy for instance. Pregnancy is a very immunodysregulated state for a woman, and you can see certain autoimmune diseases get better, certain
Hmm.
autoimmune diseases get worse,
Hmm.
and some stay the same. And so there are certainly different touch points within the immune system that are upregulated, downregulated, and that leads to manifestation of autoimmunity. So with these peptides, the same is true. We What they have been studied for, and we've got some case studies as well, is multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid
Mm.
arthritis,
Mm.
inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. These have been shown to have some healing properties for
It's
those.
amazing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of were talking about how it works. So can
Hmm.
you go into maybe like,
Yeah, so this is a little bit different than BPC. So the way that TB500 works is it actually it modulates actin. So if you remember back to, like, I don't know, high school biology, maybe college A&P, when you're talking about muscular movement and the sarcomere, right? The unit of action in a muscle is the sarcomere, and it works via actin and myosin fibers. So this TB500 actually upregulates the polymerization of actin. So if you want to think about actin as like maybe the freeway that things are traveling in order to get to a place of injury. So it's inducing the actin freeway so that other helpful and healing and inflammatory cells can get to an area of injury. Does
Okay.
that make sense? So it's like drawing, you can think of it like a beacon. It's kind of drawing things in. It's almost the same principle as like a dry needling, where
Yeah.
you create the injury. Now, this is not creating any injury, but the end result is the same. So, dry needling creates injury around the site and then entices things to, hey, we're injured over here, come and heal this area. Um, so, TB500 works much the same way, where it's drawing in those cellular components that are critical for repair.
Okay.
Now, it also works on the inflammatory system, and it has that anti-inflammatory impact. It, and but it also brings, and gosh, this is why the immune system is so complex. But there's inflammatory compounds that we want, and then other inflammatory compounds that are not good for the system, right? So there's
Right.
inflammation that's bad, and there's inflammation that's good.
Yeah. So
Um,
think like inflammation from working out, good.
exactly,
Inflammation
exactly.
from autoimmune, bad.
Right. Yes, yes. And so it's got those immuno kind of modulating effects, but that's why it's good for certain forms of autoimmunity.
Okay.
Now it also, so I was talking about cellular recruitment, it will recruit stem cells to the area as well, and seems to help with the differentiation pathways. So when you bring, that's the excuse me, that's the power of stem cells. They're called pluripotent, and the reason for that is because they have lots of different fates that can befall them. So they can run down lots of different pathways and become all kinds of different things. So when TB500 hits the area, it recruits those stem cells and then further helps them to differentiate into the healing cells that are needed.
Okay.
So it puts them on the right pathway to heal the injury in front of them. Now, here's another kicker. TB500, like BPC-157, can cause some angiogenic blood vessel formation. And so remember that was a caution that
Yeah.
we gave with BPC 157, because it potentially can vascularize growths in the body, and we know that that is how cancer feeds itself, is it causes vascularization and angiogenesis, which means that it creates blood vessels to form its own blood supply.
Okay. Yes.
Mhm.
So, can you kind of go over how they work together again?
Yeah, so think of TB500 focusing on bringing all the actors to the stage, right?
Mhm.
And it also will cause some degree of angiogenesis, because we've got to have blood supply in order to heal something. So blood supply is a double-edged sword, right? It blood creating blood vessels and creating those freeways. If you're bringing it to an injury, great. If you're bringing it to a tumor, not so great. Okay.
Yes, right.
Now, BPC 157 can help with the inflammatory cascade, and TB500 does this to a degree too. But it enhances gut healing, tendon and ligament repair, and then also that immunomodulatory, where it upregulates and downregulates based on what is needed to heal the injury. So it's a more comprehensive healing response that occurs when they are used together. However, I would caution again those who have autoimmunity, please check with a knowledgeable person. If you have a history of malignancy or neoplasm, that fancy words for cancers, check with a provider on
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Because potentially this wouldn't be something you'd
This,
wanna use or
well,
use within, like, certain periods of time, maybe
yeah.
shortened periods of time?
Or just to have somebody be able to tell you, okay, let's try it, but this is what we're looking for. There are potentially blood markers that we want to keep track of. There are, you want somebody who knows what they're doing to say, oh, let's run a CBC every 4 to 6 weeks and just see how this is going. Or why don't you check in with me and I'm going to go through a list of things that I'm watching for,
Mhm.
just to make sure that this isn't happening.
Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
So what you kinda mentioned it before, but what common uses are you seeing it? And also the other question I had, would you ever use them independently of each other? Is there a reason to
Mhm.
use them independently?
Yes, so I have seen BPC used independently. So if okay, for instance, and we're going to get into dosage form here in a minute, but BPC seems to have now and I'll just be real honest. I'm not completely sold on this yet, although there has been some promise, and I did use my father-in-law as a guinea pig for this because hey Barry, shout out. I got him some oral BPC, and because I wanted him to take it for an injury that he was trying to heal, and I need to check in with him actually and see how that went. But
Barry, you still there?
Barry, I know, Barry, call me. But this the oral formulation of BPC appears to maybe be a little more stable. And so I have seen that used for gut healing, in order to introduce um, a systemic version of it into the body, right?
So my question on that one is if
Mm-hmm.
you have really bad gut health and you're
Mm-hmm.
not able to absorb typical supplementations,
Yeah.
how can your body absorb and use BPC 157 in the oral form?
Yeah. So that's kind of what it's for, is gut
Oh,
repair.
so
Yeah.
it
So
it kind of bypasses
theoretically,
that.
yes, theoretically, it would bypass um the uh, the acidity and all the things that break it down, but that again, that would have to be in the formulation. There would have to be some protections built in. Um so that said, I have seen BPC 157 used independently. Here's another instance. If you have an autoimmunity that appears to be upregulated by TB500, which is not out of the question, it potentially could worsen things for you.
Mm,
If that is the case, I've seen BPC used by itself to heal injury sites, musculoskeletal, tendon, wound healing, post op, that kind of thing.
okay, okay.
Hmm.
So, how do people use it? So, say their provider, say
Hmm.
like somebody like you who lives in Idaho, prescribes
Hmm.
it to me in Colorado. How do
Hmm.
I get it? How do I, you know,
Hmm.
inject it? Or is this also something that can be orally administered?
Yeah, so this gosh, this is another reason why I would get with somebody knowledgeable. There are places that I trust, but I also want to talk with my patients first, just to make sure that in fact, I had a patient the other day that had, something that I was not too suspicious about, but we're going to get it checked out before we embark on this peptide journey.
Hmm.
And so yeah, that and I'm also able to guide and direct in terms of, okay, where's the best place to get this.
Hmm.
This is not something that I prescribe or that anyone really prescribes unless it's made by a compounding pharmacy. The laws are just it's really squishy. It's really squishy when it comes to peptides. So there are some formulations that you can actually write prescriptions for, and a compounding pharmacy will formulate it for you. But for the most part, These are research compounds. They are not FDA approved for human use. And that's why none of what we are sharing today is to be construed as medical advice. Thank you. But just information, education, entertainment purposes only, right? So,
Uh-huh.
yes. So these, they are not FDA approved for human use. Therefore, I cannot prescribe them. So
Yeah.
there is no prescription that is written.
Hmm.
Now there are a few, like for instance, for the terzepatide,
Hmm.
semaglutide,
But those are FDA
um,
approved.
those are FDA approved. So yeah, it's a really weird space. It's just a real weird space. So you want somebody that knows what the heck they're doing.
All right.
Yeah.
So how do I use them? So if I got
So
them,
yeah, so these are again with the TB500 the very best, and until I see some different information, the very best way is via sub-Q injection. So this is just subcutaneous right into that. We've talked about this before. It's I usually tell patients to go, 2-3 inches away from the umbilicus. So you take your belly button, you go in a 3-inch circle and just put it somewhere outside of that 2 or 3 inch circle.
and these are
Um,
like the
oh, they're
diabetic
tiny. Yes.
yeah, diabetic
Hmm.
needles.
That's exactly what they are. So they are usually administered with either, a 1 cc, a half cc, or a third of a cc syringe. And
Okay.
this is another reason why please talk with somebody that can help you, because I see so many mistakes being made, where people are getting these little vials of powder. They are reconstituting them with what, right? With what? Does it need saline? Does it need bacteriostatic water? What is this stable in? And then further, it's like, well, my whole vial is 5 milligrams or 5 grams or whatever, whatever you happen to be getting. And so if that's the case, if you dilute it with 5 mils, then what's your concentration? I need a dose of 250 micrograms. And then you look at your syringe and it's units. Okay. So what do I pull? I don't even know what to stick in me, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's a rather complicated thing. And so again, you just want a little bit of training on how to do this safely.
Yeah, right. And how stable or unstable is
BPC
sorry.
157
Well, I
or
knew that
TB
what
500.
TB500 compared to BPC, because I remember you saying like, if you shake it, the
Yeah.
BPC 157, it's unstable. It's not
Same
stable
thing.
enough.
Same thing. I don't, in fact, any of your peptides do not shake. Because again, think about an egg white.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of a
Yeah.
protein, and you don't want to denature that thing.
Yeah,
So no
exactly.
shaking, no heating. They are generally more stable in the refrigerator, especially after reconstitution. You want to keep them in the fridge.
Okay.
Mhm.
So BPC 157, you were talking about there's
Mhm.
a nasal and oral. So same
Yeah.
for TB 500?
Yeah. So there, and you can even, gosh, you can even do an intramuscular injection of these, like if you've got a deep muscle injury, but that's a little harder for people to do because if you're dosing this several times a week, where are you going to get someone to give you an IM injection several times a week? You can do it yourself. Men do this all the time with their testosterone therapy, but it's not for the squeamish. So oral administration, yes, but I really think we're not there yet with TB500. BPC 157 may more so,
Yeah,
definitely more
yeah.
so. But yeah, they are, so they're trying to coat these things in like liposomal entities or nanoparticle constituents that will protect it from breakdown, so that it can get where it's going. But we're just not there yet. So there is some limited data on use via the nasal mucosa. So a lot of people are using these intranasally, and again, it's not at the injury site, so you're not getting that localized impact, But if you need it for neurological applications, if you need it for systemic effects, I'd still probably go with the sub-Q, but for neurological impact, you might do the intranasal because it is highly vascularized inside the nose.
Okay. So what cautions do we need for the
Hmm.
TB500?
Yeah, so this is what I really wanted to get to. Again, I can't say this enough, and I'm gonna keep sounding like a one-trick pony here, but cancer possibilities, because of the angiogenic role that this plays, you want to be really careful with potential for tumor growth. You There's also, we don't have a lot of data, so it is kind of the wild west, and I kind of like it that way, because it's the cutting edge. I've said it before. I think this is the future of medicine.
Yeah.
They're generally extremely safe and well tolerated. So, but there is a potential because of its activity. um, Now, there's also immune system overactivity. So, as I mentioned, if you've got autoimmunity, you need to be very, very mindful. And this is again where you want to engage the help of a provider, because sometimes there are certain, there are serum antibodies that you can check. There are blood markers that you can check where we can give a peptide, and then, every 6 weeks, 2 months, 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 months, whatever it is, you can recheck that blood value and say, well, this part of your immune system is getting a little stimulated. I see antibodies increasing. This may not be the best peptide for you.
Okay.
Um, Also, I think I forgot to mention this with the BPC 157, but obviously, pregnancy and breastfeeding, I really don't recommend any peptides during this particular phase of life for women, because we just don't know.
Yeah.
And the risk is, I mean, when the risk is completely unknown, um, then it's just not worth it.
So a question I have too, can these be used as a preventative or are these strictly for
Mm.
healing and repair?
Boy, that is such a good question, Ashley. I would say no, I would not use these as a preventative. I would only use these in the context of an acute or a chronic injury.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Now,
right.
as always, I don't know everything, and I would reserve the right to change my mind on that. That we
Yeah.
may find that, gosh, it's got incredible gut protective benefits. So here is one place where you could potentially, I could see some use as a preventative. So, like for instance, if you are, so I use certain probiotics with people as a preventative when they're going like to Mexico on a trip. But
Hello.
yeah, I know. I just reminded myself that I need to talk to you about that. But yeah, so if someone's going to Mexico and they want to protect their gut, or they're going overseas somewhere else, there are certain probiotics that have been proven very useful, to keep you from getting viral gastroenteritis or bacterial gastroenteritis. Um, and so I could see potentially, using some BPC 157. Now, there are other peptides that you absolutely can use as preventative, prevent from getting sick, preventative from, getting all kinds of things. But these in particular, maybe there would be some gut application, but I can't think of anything else.
All right. And
Mhm.
we mentioned it last time too, but
Yeah.
obviously athletes,
Yeah.
if you are a professional athlete competing in sports, just make sure that you know your federation's laws or rules
Mhm.
based on what you're allowed to
Yeah.
take. Um, some of these are definitely banned from
Mhm.
some federations. So
Yeah, I
just
know
just be
it's
mindful
banned
of
by
that.
WADA, but check your individual federation
Yep.
for sure.
So, well, this was fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, these peptides are just such a new world for me, and so I know
Mhm.
you've been very fascinated with them for a long time. So I know you're excited to
Mhm. I
finally get them
am.
out in the open.
Yes.
So again, I think we mentioned it with the other peptide episode, but obviously check with your primary care provider to
Mhm.
see where they stand on peptides. And like Andrea said, if they're not really keen on them, it might be time to do some new research on a new provider. And
Yeah.
really, it goes back to our episodes on primary care, because if your provider is not curious about new ways of treating and even entertaining your questions, that is
Mhm.
a real big red flag.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not that they don't know anything. I'm not saying that they're stupid, but at the same time, if everything is always evolving and changing,
Right.
and
Right.
so there has to be some level of curiosity.
Mhm.
And especially with stuff like this that it has relatively low risk considering, it
Yeah.
should be considered something to explore.
Right.
Um, and like Andrea was saying, obviously you want to get your blood markers checked, and you want to make sure that you're, a good candidate for these types of
Mhm.
things. But
Mhm.
um, you always
Yeah.
want somebody on your side that's always curious and who's
Right.
always wanting to learn. Just even in the health and fitness space, like if your trainer is kind of stuck in their ways and they're not interested in what the new research is showing, that's a
Mhm.
big red flag as well. So
Yeah.
it goes in both health and wellness
Mhm. Yeah, we
space.
don't have the luxury, like, you don't get into this line of work, what you do or what I do. We don't have the luxury of resting on our laurels and just, well, we've already learned everything there is, and
Yeah,
so,
I
no,
have my
you haven't.
degree. No.
Yeah, yeah, my gosh, you can't. Like, your degree and board certification or, whatever certification, that's the jumping off place. Like, that's the
Mhm.
bare minimum that
Yeah,
it takes to practice in whatever you're doing. Then it then becomes the real education, and you've got to keep learning. Otherwise you're
absolutely.
doing a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you
Mhm.
have any questions on TB500 or BPC-157, we would love to
Mhm.
hear from you. Or maybe if you've tried them, we would love to know
Yeah.
your experience. So
Yep.
have you done TB500?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so
I
you did
used
it.
it. Yeah, with the BPC-157. And in fact, these two peptides, the reason I started with these two is they are the most widely known of all the peptides. They've probably been used in the lay population for the longest period of time. And
Okay.
so yeah, they've been around. People are familiar with these. We're going to get into some little different ones later on that maybe people don't have any familiarity with. But these are pretty widely known.
Okay. Well, again, we always love to hear from you, or if there is a peptide that you're curious about and want us to
Yes.
touch on next, we
Mhm.
want to do these about once a month, and
Mhm.
start educating you guys and myself on what these peptides can do for us.
Yeah.
So definitely hit us up. Our contact information is in the show notes as always, and
Mhm.
we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye. The content provided in the AA podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical advice.